Past 8, and it's time for Dr. John from Creation Ministries International. Good morning, Dr. John.
Good morning, Mick.
It's great to have you here, Dr. John. It's been such a long time.
Yeah, look, we've been, as I suppose most of our listeners know, we've been doing it, me from home on the phone, but now we're back in the studio.
We're back.
Praise God, the restrictions are getting lifted.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And of course, we've had some interesting news this week. I've got to say, I saw some news yesterday. Something in regards to the Hubble telescope taking pictures of space, and they've figured out that, the universe as we see it is nowhere near as big as they first thought. And also news during the week that they've, this is astronomers, they've been looking at space and they've been saying we can't see when, that day zero was. Apparently, with these telescopes, they're meant to be able to see back to when the universe began. And they're saying, we can't see it. It must be billions of years older than we ever thought. So they've just immediately come up with it must be something else because it's not what we first thought. So this whole Big Bang theory is really being Big Banged right now.
Yeah, well, look, there's going to be a lot more surprises, I think, that they'll find in the area of astronomy, because that particular probe that you were talking about was New Horizons, I think.
Yes.
And a couple of years ago, it got out to Pluto. And now, of course, it's way beyond Pluto, a couple of billion, kilometres beyond Pluto.
Yep.
And really, there will be many, many more surprises. And the one thing that you can guarantee is that the reports will be not at all what the scientists were expecting.
No,
you'll see that in everything.
They're definitely not lining up with any Big Bang. So, interesting news for them anyway.
Yeah, they're all good stuff. But today I think we're going to have to go back to a couple of the questions that we got last week. And really, look, I'd like to say thank you to all the listeners who are sending in the questions, because we're getting lots of them. And they are really interesting questions as well. And last week we finished off our talks on dinosaurs because we had a lot of questions on them. But there's so much more that we could have said. So if you've still got questions on dinosaurs, don't be afraid to send them in. But then we got on to, of course, the most topical item of all at the moment, which is the Black Lives Matter protests around the world. And I started to explain why racism is a topic that we really do take a lot of interest in at Creation Ministries. And we take a lot of interest in it because it's so inextricably tied up with Darwinian evolutionary belief. And Christians really need to understand that so that they can explain it to their friends. Now, obviously, we don't blame Darwin for starting off racism. He certainly didn't start it. It was alive and well before he came. But his teaching really gave racism a huge boost. Yep. Because what it did was it gave it a pseudo-scientific foundation. Because that different evolution of various ethnic and racial groups really is a foundational part of evolutionary belief. Yep. And if children are taught evolution, then, and particularly when they're taught that it's scientific, you're never going to get rid of racism because it's absolutely ingrained in that sort of teaching. Yep. You can talk about racial equality all you like, but if there's racial inequality in the foundational beliefs that you have, then it's always going to be around.
Yes, absolutely. I also noticed the story this week, I think it was Huffington Post, they were talking about saying ni hao, which, we like to say g'day to an Aussie. You say g'day because it's a good thing to do. And ni hao I thought was sort of a Chinese way of saying g'day, and apparently it's racist. So the Chinese is saying, this is the story that I read, and I thought, wow, we've got some weird ideas of racism these days as well. Just in the, saying g'day to somebody in their own language is not necessarily a good thing.
Yes, well, maybe that's so. I hadn't heard that particular one, but you're quite right. A lot of our expressions go back somewhere. We don't, g'day, I think, comes from actually a God day.
Wow.
You know, I think that's where it comes from, but we just say good day, you know. And but yeah, we do have to look at a lot of these expressions that we use. There are some that used to be quite common, and I'm not going to mention them, that you would never use now because they clearly are racist. But look, I'm not saying that if we teach biblical truth that we're ever going to eliminate racism, but if the scientific foundations of your belief are correct, then you really ought to be able to expect pretty good results from it. And when I speak about the scientific foundations of biblical creation teaching, that's exactly what I mean, because all the biological, genetic, linguistic and anthropological evidence that we have completely supports the biblical account of our origins. It doesn't support a Big Bang or evolutionary account of origins. So I'm going to tie in our questions that came in during the week with exactly what the Bible does say.
Oh, cool. This sounds like it'll be an exciting morning with Dr. John from Creation Ministries International. Send your questions through to 0401 949 949. Anything to do with creation or evolution or even the Big Bang or dinosaurs or aliens, all those sorts of things. That text line again, SMS 0401 949 949. It is 18 minutes past 8. 1 years, you're on 94.9 this morning. It's 22 minutes past 8. And I have Dr. John in the studio from Creation Ministries International. And another good morning to you, Dr. John. It really is great to have you in the studio again, finally.
It's good to be here, Mick. I think it's wonderful that we're able to be at least back to some semblance of normality. You know, that's the best thing.
Yes, absolutely. Now, of course, Dr. John, we're answering some questions that came in last week. One of them came in from Kevin. Thank you, Kevin, for sending it in. And the question was, how can we explain to non-believers that the world was populated only through Adam and Eve and their sons Abel and Cain?
Yeah, well, that's a good question, isn't it? And of course, there's a bit in it that needs explanation, because you couldn't populate the world through Cain and Abel because they were both men. And even after Cain murdered Abel, the only other child mentioned for Adam is Seth, and he was born when Adam was 130 years old, and he was male as well. But it really is a great question, because it actually leads on to one of the very famous questions in history. And if you go back to about 100 years ago, into the 1920s in America, there was a very famous trial of a school teacher. And he was charged with teaching evolution in school. It was illegal back then, 100 years ago. And the trial gets referred to as the Scopes Monkey Trial, named after the teacher. And it was made into a movie called Inherit the Wind. And the very smart defence lawyer was played in the film by Spencer Tracy. And he asked the Christian witness, where did Cain get his wife? Because, of course, Genesis 4:17 clearly says that Cain did have one. Okay? And the answer, of course, is found in Genesis 5:4, where it also specifically states that Adam had other sons and daughters apart from those named sons.
Yes.
And that means that Cain's wife must have been one of his sisters. Now, that sounds pretty strange to us these days, but it would have been quite normal back then, because
all a lot of options.
And all of humanity, all of the original animals would have had to reproduce through sibling relationships. So it wasn't abnormal to them. But it's interesting that the Christian witness couldn't answer the question.
Yeah,
he was stumped. And I mean, the way Hollywood portrayed it in the film, it was very, very supportive of evolution, and biblical belief was made to look very, very foolish. So really, it is one of the most famous questions in history, and thank you, Kevin, for raising that, because it really is a good one, and it's one that we do have to look at. So the original population of the world before the flood was a sibling relationship all the sons and daughters of Adam and Eve and their progeny and so on. So after the first generation, I suppose they could have been first cousins or whatever.
Yep.
But certainly there would have been a lot of sibling relationships. But that wasn't abnormal then, because everything was originally created perfect. There were no harmful mutations. There wouldn't have been any problem whatsoever in sibling intermarriage.
Yep.
So really, it's not until you get to the time of the flood that we find that things actually changed.
Ooh, we'll find out about that after this break, I guess. You're on 94.9 this morning. It is 26 minutes past 8. SMS 0401 949 949. Now, Dr. John's been answering the question that came in from Kevin last week. How can we explain to non-believers that the world was populated only through Adam and Eve and their sons Abel and Cain? Now, we've talked about Adam and Eve, Abel and Cain, right through to the Noah's flood. And I've got to say, Dr. John, I've seen the creation.com website that explains the human population, sort of their model. And whilst it comes out as spot on, it's extremely detailed. But you're going to give us a brief view of what happened from then.
Yes, well, I think we have to realise, Mick, how terrible things were at the time of the flood and why God sent it. Because the Bible tells us that the world had become totally violent and corrupt, characterised by depravity and wickedness amongst the people. It must have been a really awful place. And Noah must have been a very, very godly man. The Bible, well, it uses Noah as a great example of somebody who prayed. And God told Noah when he was 500 to build an ark. And Noah, his three sons, Shem, Ham and Japheth, are named as coming when he was 500 years old. But in fact, at least Shem and Ham were not born when God spoke to Noah to start building that ark. So he must have been one of very, very, very few, if any, who were godly people at that time.
Yeah.
So anyway, of course, after the flood, Genesis specifically states that the entire subsequent population of the world, and that includes everybody on earth today, every single one of us, is a descendant of Noah's three sons. There aren't any others. And so no matter what our skin colour or our ethnic origin, we're all very, very closely related, and all of this happened only about a little over 4,000 years ago. So as the population grew over the next couple of hundred years with all speaking the same language, there would have been completely free intermarriage between all of those originally first cousins and then second cousins and so on. So the division into ethnic and racial groups only took place when God divinely confused their languages and separated them on the basis of language and paternity. And that's what caused them to populate the whole world. So that happened about 5 generations after the flood. So every ethnic group at that time would have taken a roughly similar genetic mix with them. And it would have been natural selection and adaptation that took place after that separation that really produced a lot of the colours and ethnic characteristics that we see today. Now, bear in mind, it's very, very probable that everybody at the time of that dispersion at Babel started off with a skin colour that was about mid-brown. Everybody. Nobody would have had white skin like we see today. And the groups that migrated to the equatorial regions would have further naturally selected for an even darker skin colour, and in the process they would have lost a lot of the genetic material for light-coloured skin. Remember, you can't gain any more genetic material. You can only lose it. And that's what happens. And, of course, the people who migrated to the equatorial regions would have become darker, because the darker your skin, the greater your survival advantage in those areas.
Yep.
You don't need, you've got plenty of sun exposure because you need plenty, because you don't produce vitamin D very well if you've got dark skin, and you are relatively immune to skin cancers if you've got dark skin. So that's why people that migrated to the equatorial regions, their skin would have got darker and darker and darker. Whereas the opposite would have happened with people who migrated to northern climates. Their, first of all, brownish skin would have got lighter and lighter and lighter as they lost the genetic material to produce dark skin. So that's really why we have the ethnic and racial groups at those extreme parts of the world.
Yep.
Now, obviously, that's a bit extreme, and many others would have been various mixtures of the two.
Yep.
But that really is the way that we have our skin colours today. Now, the fact is, everybody has got some dark skin pigment. It's just that the darker skinned people have got a lot of it, and the lighter skinned people haven't got very much of it. But you notice when they get a lot of sun exposure that even light skin starts to have the melanocytes, the darker cells proliferate because they get tanned. But a lot of people have lost that. I mean, people of Irish and Scottish origin don't seem to tan terribly well at all. They
must have a little bit of that. I burn really easily.
Yeah, they just burn easily. So really, you can see that there is only one skin colour, right? It's just various amounts of the melanin pigment. And there is only one race, the human race.
Yeah.
We have not evolved from a common ancestor with apes. We were specifically created human right from the beginning. But you see, all children are now taught that all of humanity evolved from ape-like ancestors. I mean, every child in every school believes that we came from monkeys. That's what they're all taught, you know. So really, that is one of the foundations of racism as we know it today.
Yeah, absolutely. And, of course, I'll just add there, you mentioned, Noah getting to the ripe old age of 500, and, of course, you being a doctor, you know that every generation those DNA chains break down, and the next generation will be a little bit more broken than the generation before. And that's why, from the age point of view, Adam, I guess, was one of the oldest guys that we've ever known of, and ages have been getting less and less. Of course, medicine these days helps a bit, but it slowly got shorter and shorter because of that breakdown. Yeah,
we can see that transition right throughout the scriptures. They lived to 900 before the flood, and then progressively it came down after the flood.
There you go. You're on 94.9 this morning. It is 17 minutes to 9, and we're with Dr. John from Creation Ministries International. Send your questions through to our text line 0401 949 949. And let me just mention as well, it is our June Appeal 2020. Believe. Yes, that is our tagline this year. If you'd like to bless the ministry of Rima Central Coast, please jump onto the website rima.cc and partner with us over either the next 12 months or just a single donation. That would be awesome. Our tally so far, $27,537. That's awesome. Let's keep it going. Good morning. Studio talking to us about we're talking about evolution, and I guess we've been talking about skin colour, and I just thought, Dr. John, somebody could sort of have a go at me for being black because I've got freckles.
It's only some of your skin that's got those those cells that are capable of producing dark skin. You haven't got very much of it. You probably don't tan very well in the sun.
Nah.
Not that you're supposed to be getting too much of that these days.
Nah.
But look, skin colour really is a fascinating subject, and the fact is we all have the same skin colour. We just have different amounts of melanin pigment in our skin.
Mm-hmm.
But there is a problem, and there is a connection between evolutionary belief and racism, the racism that comes from skin colour. Because every child in our schools, because they're now taught evolution, they all think that we came from monkeys. That's how they express it. Yep. That's not what the teaching really is. It just says that we've got a common ancestor with apes. But the way kids put it, they say, "Oh, we came from monkeys."
Yep.
And when you think of that evolutionary diagram that everybody is familiar with, you see it everywhere. The sequence of humanity from the ape on the left-hand side going through to the modern human on the right. Now, everybody sees that. It's on everything. You even see T-shirts with it. You see it on bottles of wine. You see it everywhere. Now, implicit in that diagram is racism.
Yes.
Because you see the colour change from the very dark ape on the left to the light-skinned modern human on the right. And it's only subliminal, but it looks as though the darker the skin, the closer to the ape. Yeah. That's what it looks like. So that's a subliminal suggestion. And we're finding it right throughout racism in sport. We even had another. I'm an AFL fan, and we had another episode in the last couple of days of Eddie Betts, who got some racist taunt, from some troll out there. Yep. And it's all to do with the same thing, regarding the darker skinned players as being closer to the apes. I mean, it's just ridiculous. And unfortunately, that evolutionary diagram reinforces racist thinking.
Yep.
Now, if we got back to a biblical foundation rather than an evolutionary one, that would be a great help, because the biblical story is completely different. We are all closely related. We have not had differential evolution, and that's what people are taught. That's what children are taught these days.
Yeah, absolutely. Wowee. So, at the end of the day, we are all the same. Black lives matter. Well, we've all got black pigment in our skin, and I guess the bottom line is all lives matter, and there shouldn't be any one person with a particular colour or shape that has a go at anybody else, because at the end of the day, we really are all the same.
Yeah, it's only skin deep, and underneath we are all very, very, very much the same.
Absolutely. It is 9 minutes to 9. We'll be back with Dr. John very shortly. 401 949 949. Now, Dr. John, we had another comment come through last week from Graham, and part of his comment was from Acts, New Testament times. All lives matter because God has made of one blood all men and set their boundaries, legal and geographical.
Yes, well, look, we've been talking, of course, so far only about us all descending from Shem, Ham and Japheth, which is Old Testament. But here we've got the New Testament comment as well, which says exactly the same thing. And we spend a bit of time on this this morning, Mick, because it's so important. It's so important that Christian people understand the connection between evolutionary belief and the racism that we see rampant in our society at the moment, and all the demonstrations that we're seeing about against it. The Black Lives Matter. Because the context of that one is that there's the Apostle Paul in Athens debating with the Greek philosophers, and he comments that the God who created the world has made from one blood. Actually, the original Greek says from one, so one blood, or Adam, because Adam really was the progenitor of everybody, including Eve. Yes. Eve came out of Adam, so we all come from Adam. But Paul takes it right back to creation, and we really come from exactly the one source. Yep. Now, I might mention here too that Creation Ministries has got a very, very good book on this for anybody who's interested. They can go to our website. There's a book called One Human Family, and it really is an excellent book. It's available from the Creation Ministries website, and anybody who's interested in the real biblical foundations of our ethnicity ought to read that book, One Human Family, from the Creation Ministries website. But Paul explains to the Greek philosophers that that's where we all came from, and God's edict now is that we are all commanded to return to him and submit to the person that he has appointed to judge the world, and that is the Lord Jesus Christ. And we are all now commanded by God to come back and submit to him. And he's the one who's going to be the judge of the world, but he's also our saviour. And everybody who commits their life to Jesus gets the promise of a wonderful life in this life, not necessarily without troubles, but certainly with a real fulfilment of life in this life and the promise of eternity with him. So what a thing to look forward to. We are all one human family. We are all equally able to share in that salvation that Jesus offers, and I think that really would be the answer to racism if people would only believe it.
Absolutely. And of course, Dr. John, in the or on the creation.com webpage, there's lots of information there in regards to that population question. And I know that one thing they spoke about, and I know it's quite detailed, but it says starting from 8 people after the flood, the population would have doubled only 30 times to reach 8.6 billion. Now, there is a well-known rule of 72, which says divide 72 by the percentage growth rate to get the time required for doubling. And, those numbers work out so well.
They are so consistent with what we do know about the growth in world populations. Yeah, when you plot that on the exponential curve that you get from Creation Ministries, you will see that they fall right along that curve. It's absolutely